Friday, May 16th, 2025. Definitely a date many commuters in New Jersey and New York City won't be forgetting anytime soon.
No, absolutely not. I mean, imagine your normal commute just gone.
Exactly. That's what hit 350,000 daily NJ Transit rail riders. And, that includes over 70,000 people just trying to get into New York City.
All because of the NJ Transit engineers' strike.
Right. And looking at the sources we've gathered for this, deep dive news reports from places like Payday Report, Forbes, Fox Business, local coverage from NBC New York News 12.
Plus broader views from Travel and Tour World, A-Invest, even specific strike analyses and economic impact studies, and that Reddit thread.
Yeah, it all points to something that didn't just happen overnight. This has been building.
Definitely. It's been brewing for years, actually.
Okay, so that's our mission today.
Wow.
Use all this material to really unpack why this is happening, understand the chaos on the ground right now, and think about the bigger picture, the longer-term effects for commuters in the whole region.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Let's start at the beginning. What's really at the heart of this? Why are the engineers actually on strike?
Well, fundamentally, it's a wage dispute. It's between the engineers union, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, or BLAA, and NJ Transit.
Okay, wages. But you said it's been brewing.
Yeah, and this is key. The engineers have been working without a new contract since 2019.
Wow, since 2019. That's a long time to go without a contract resolution.
It absolutely is. A huge amount of uncertainty for them.
So what are they asking for? Is it just about keeping up with inflation, or is there more to it?
It's more. Based on the reporting, especially from Payday Report and the strike analysis doc, their demands are kind of twofold.
Okay.
First, they want raises that genuinely reflect how expensive it is to live in the areas they serve, so they can actually afford to live somewhat near where they work.
Makes sense. And the second part?
Wage parity. They want to be paid comparably to engineers on other big regional lines like Amtrak or the MTA's Long Island Railroad.
Ah, parity.
Yeah.
How big a difference are they saying there is?
BLA claims their members make at least $10 an hour less. They frame it as about a $55,000 annual pay gap compared to those other engineers.
$55,000, yeah, that's a pretty substantial gap if that's the case.
Yeah.
So what are the actual salary figures we're looking at here? What's the current average, and what's the union shooting for?
This is where it gets a little tricky because the numbers being reported differ slightly depending on who you ask.
Okay.
BLA has apparently said their members average around $113,000 a year right now, and they're looking for something closer to $170,000.
Right, $113K to $170K.
But NJ Transit tells a different story. They say the current average total earnings are more like $135,000.
Total earnings. So that might include overtime, benefits.
Possibly. That's often where these discrepancies come from. And NJ Transit also put out this figure, projecting that the union's proposal could push some engineer salaries up to like $314,174.
Whoa, okay. That's a huge jump in a very different picture.
It is. It really highlights how far apart they seem to be, just on the basic numbers.
So given that gap, what did NJ Transit actually put on the table? What was their offer?
They proposed a deal they called competitive. According to Forbes and A-Invest, it would have raised average pay to about $172,856 by 2027.
$172,856. That sounds, on the surface, pretty close to the union's target of $170,000 you mentioned.
It does, which makes what happened next really interesting. That offer, it was rejected back in March.
Rejected? How bad?
Overwhelmingly. By 87% of the union members who voted.
87%. Wow, okay, that really speaks volumes. It wasn't even close.
Not all. It shows just how deep the disagreement runs, even if the top-line numbers seem somewhat close. There must be other factors in the details, or maybe just a fundamental lack of trust.
So if NJ Transit offered that kind of money, what's their main argument against meeting the union's demands fully? What's the big financial hurdle they're pointing to?
Their argument is that meeting BLET's full demands would be financially crippling. They've put a price tag on it, $1.363 billion between now and 2030.
Over $1 billion. That's a massive number for a public agency.
It is, and they claim to cover that they'd have no choice but to implement pretty drastic measures.
Like what?
Like a 17% fare hike for all riders starting this July. And on top of that, a 27% increase in the corporate transit fee, which is, a tax on businesses.
Ouch. Big hits to both riders and businesses.
Exactly. And the CEO, Kevin Kaluri, he's framed it in pretty stark terms. He called the union demands an existential problem that could potentially bankrupt the whole system.
Bankrupt. That's strong language.
Yeah.
So that's NJ Transit's position. it's financially impossible. What does the union say to that? Do they buy it?
Not really, no. BLET fundamentally pushes back on those financial projections.
That's so.
Well, for one, they disagree that giving raises to engineers would automatically mean they have to give similar raises to all their other unions. They see that as maybe an inflated calculation by the agency.
Okay, that's one point.
And then there's the spending argument. The union, particularly their national president, Mark Wallace, points to other big expenditures by NJ Transit. Things like the $500 million planned for a new headquarters building, or $53 million reportedly spent on interior decorating. Wallace had that quote about penthouse views and pet projects.
I saw that. Kind of a pointed remark.
Definitely. They also mentioned the $20 million lost revenue from a recent fair holiday. The union's argument is basically, look, the agency does seem to find money for these other things, so why not for fair compensation for its engineers?
So it creates this perception, at least from the union side, of misplaced priorities.
Exactly. It feeds into this feeling that maybe it's not just about the money. The strike analysis briefing we looked at hints at this too, a sense among engineers of not being respected or valued equitably, even while the agency invests heavily in, say, infrastructure.
So it's wages, it's parity, it's this feeling of respect, a real tangle of issues.
A perfect storm, really. And now the result is no trains.
Right. Let's talk about that immediate impact. The trains are stopped. What does that actually mean on the ground?
It means, as you said, 350,000 daily riders are stranded. That number alone is huge. And the 70,000 plus going into New York City are particularly hard hit.
And it's not just one or two lines, right?
No, it's the entire system, all NJ Transit rail service. That includes the main lines like the Northeast Corridor, but also lines serving cities across New Jersey, the link to Newark Airport, even the services that go into Orange and Rockland counties in New York. It's a total shutdown.
A complete halt. So for those 350,000 people, what are they supposed to do? What are the alternatives?
Well, that's the major problem. The alternatives are, frankly, pretty inadequate. NJ Transit is running contingency buses.
Okay, buses. How much can they cover?
That's the catch. According to Forbes and Fox Business, those buses can only handle about 20%, one-fifth the usual rail ridership.
Only 20%. Wow. So 80% of riders are just left scrambling.
Pretty much. It leaves this massive gap. You know, this might inadvertently push a lot of people into remote work, maybe even permanently changing how they think about commuting.
Yeah, I can see that. But for those who have to commute, that 80% gap must be causing chaos elsewhere.
Oh, absolutely. The sources, like News 12 New Jersey, are full of stories about it. Massive overcrowding on the remaining buses, path trains completely jammed.
And prices for other options.
Through the roof. Amtrak ridership is way up, and some ticket prices have reportedly jumped to nearly $100 for routes that are normally much cheaper.
$100 for a train ticket that's usually, maybe $20 or $30?
Exactly. Ferry services like C-Streak are also seeing huge surges, maybe 20% more riders, and predictably, Uber and Lyft fares are surging like crazy because demand is off the charts.
It sounds incredibly stressful and expensive for commuters.
It is. News 12 shared one commuter story, Sophia Bianchi, saying her daily commute costs shot up by an extra $80.
$80 a day. That's just unsustainable for most people.
Completely unsustainable. And the cost isn't just personal, there's a wider economic hit, right?
Yeah. What are the estimates on that? The Partnership for New York City Analysis had some numbers, I think.
They did, and they're pretty staggering. They estimate that for every single hour of delay for these NJ Transit commuters, employers in New York City lose about $5.9 million in productivity.
$5.9 million per hour.
Per hour. It hits finance, manufacturing, services, basically everything.
Yeah.
And then there's the cost of running those emergency buses. The strike analysis suggested that could be costing taxpayers $4 million a day.
It's just mind-boggling, the ripple effect from this one shutdown.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, how vital this transit artery is for the region.
And it's not just about office jobs and productivity, is it? What about essential services?
That's a major concern, too. Chambers of Commerce are warning about disruptions to healthcare, to education, even to supply chains. If nurses, teachers, delivery drivers can't get to work reliably...
Yeah, the system starts to break down.
It really does. And even leisure activities are impacted. Forbes mentioned canceled service for Shakira concerts, and there's worry about the upcoming Beyoncé shows at MetLife Stadium. Those events rely heavily on NJ Transit.
So it touches basically every aspect of life. Let's zoom in on the commuters again. We've heard the cost, the difficulty, what's the mood, what are people saying?
Frustration is probably an understatement. Anger is definitely there. News 12 quoted a commuter, Dave Gateloff, who was just furious about paying higher fares year after year, only to end up with a strike.
You can understand that feeling. Paying more for less, essentially.
Exactly. And then you have stories like Rahul Thotes, mentioned in Travel and Tour World, being stranded in Trenton, missing appointments. It just highlights the real human cost, the disruption to people's actual lives.
It makes it very real. And that Reddit thread you mentioned earlier, what kinds of workarounds are people discussing there? Are there any clever solutions popping up?
It's mostly a picture of people trying to find the least bad option. Driving is one, of course, but someone pointed out the potential hit to their car insurance premiums from all the extra mileage.
Oh, good point. Didn't think of that.
Yeah. The NJ Transit contingency buses are seen as too slow and still expensive. There's mention of private services like Boxcar, but their schedules are really limited.
So not a solution for everyone.
Not at all. A lot of discussion seems to revolve around driving to a PATH station, like in Newark or Harrison, and taking PATH the rest of the way. Still a hassle, but maybe more viable for some.
Right, adding another leg to the journey.
Exactly. And the Lakeland bus line came up, too, as an option for certain routes. But overall, it's clear people are just desperately patching together commutes, losing time, spending more money. It's a tough situation.
A real scramble. Okay, let's shift to the politics and the negotiations. What are the leaders saying? Governor Murphy.
Governor Murphy's position is, well, he's walking a bit of a tightrope. He's publicly supported the union's right to strike.
Okay.
But he's also been pretty sharp in his criticism of the union's actions. Forbes reported him calling the strike a mess of the union's own making and even a slap in the face to commuters.
Strong words there, too. So, supporting the right, but not happy with the outcome.
Pretty much. He's urging both sides to get back to the table and find a deal that's fair but also affordable.
And what about NJ Transit leadership? CEO Kaluriev, his position beyond the bankrupt the system argument.
He's echoing the governor's call for urgency, framing the union's demands as that existential problem we talked about. He keeps emphasizing the need for a deal that works for the engineers, yes, but also for the riders and the taxpayers who ultimately foot the bill.
So, both sides seem pretty dug in. Where do the actual negotiations stand right now? Are they even talking?
It sounds like formal talks are stalled, basically. The National Mediation Board has apparently scheduled a meeting for Sunday, tentatively.
Tentatively? So not set in stone?
Doesn't sound like it. And both sides are saying, you know, we're ready to talk sooner, but they seem to be waiting for the other side to make the first move.
A standoff.
Yeah. James P. Louie from the BLET was quoted saying, they feel the ball is in NJ Transit's court now, that it's their turn to come back with a better offer.
Classic negotiation deadlock. Okay, looking past the immediate crisis, what are the bigger, maybe longer-lasting implications here?
Well, one huge potential consequence is that shifting commuting we touched on earlier. This strike could really accelerate the move towards remote work.
Especially since NJ Transit itself is advising people to work from home if they can.
Exactly. It's almost like a forced experiment. The question is, how many people find they can work from home effectively and maybe decide they don't want to go back to the daily commute, even after the strike ends?
And if that happens, if ridership drops permanently?
Then you've got a serious problem for NJ Transit's finances, which, ironically, is a core issue in this very strike. It could become a bit of a vicious cycle.
Less ridership, less fare revenue, potentially leading to service cuts or more fare hikes down the line.
Precisely. And it could even impact the real estate market. Less demand for office space, maybe even shifts in where people choose to live if proximity to transit becomes less critical.
And is this happening in isolation, or is it part of a bigger trend?
It definitely seems to be part of a larger pattern. That Travel and Tour World piece framed it in a national context. Transit workers across the country are pushing harder for better pay and conditions.
So it's a moment for transportation equity, maybe?
It could be seen that way. It highlights that ongoing tension between funding public transit and properly valuing the essential workers who run it.
And we shouldn't forget the history here. This isn't the first NJ Transit strike, but it's been a while.
A long while. The last major one was back in 1983, and that one lasted 34 days.
34 days. Oof. That raises the specter of a really prolonged disruption this time, too.
It certainly does. Nobody wants that, but it's a historical precedent that's likely on everyone's mind.
So when you really boil it down, we're seeing a fundamental clash, aren't we? It's fair pay for essential work versus the stark financial realities and constraints of running a massive public transit system.
That's the core of it. And the impact radiates outwards, hitting commuters, the economy, maybe even changing how we work and live in the long run.
It really throws a spotlight on how fragile some of these public transit models might be, especially the ones so dependent on fare revenue now that work patterns are shifting so much.
Definitely.
It makes you think, doesn't it? This whole situation forces us to ask some tough questions about how we value essential labor, how we fund these vital services sustainably. What does this strike really tell us about finding that balance between what workers need, what riders can afford, and what keeps the system itself afloat? It's certainly something to keep thinking about as this unfolds.